Assalamu alaikum. It's wonderful to be back in Lahore again, and I'm very grateful indeed to the Asma Jahangir Memorial Conference and all the organizers for everything they've done, I think, to make this such a fantastic success. I'm going to start by a reading which comes from the Valley of Kashmir, and it has to be, by definition, an anonymous reading, and the person who wrote this also felt that he couldn't appear even virtually. If you'll excuse my pronunciation in the early part of it. जिस्म पर कैद हैं, जज्बात पे ज़ंजीरें हैं, फ़िक्र में बूस है, कुफ्ता पे तज़रीन है. With caged bodies and chained emotions, imprisoned are our thoughts and utterances censored. This verse from Faiz Ahmed Faiz's epic poem, Chand Roz Aur Meri Jaan, encapsulates the individual tragedy of an ordinary Kashmiri and also the collective tragedy of Indian-administered Kashmir. Daily life for most in the valley is a never-ending struggle. It is a struggle to exist and to survive, to tell the tale. People believe that to stay alive during adverse times requires immense courage. Surviving, they say, is an act of rebellion in the new order. The new order, according to the New Delhi-led administration headed by a lieutenant governor, is the Naya Kashmir, New Kashmir, post-August 5th, 2019, a day when the restive region lost its semi-autonomous status and statehood. It is a tectonic shift which has rendered objective and fair chronicling of events on the grounds as acts of treason. A new media policy 2020 introduced by the administration empowers a clerk or a bureaucrat in its Department of Information and Public Relations to initiate a legal action against a newspaper owner, proprietor, editor, journalist, and reporter, and paint their reportage anti-national, seditious, and fake. According to the media policy, it shall focus on creating a sustained narrative on the functioning of the government in media. Imagine a situation in which you, as a storyteller and a journalist, cannot tell a story, cannot write, and pay a cost and face consequences for documenting the ordeal. Every single Kashmiri is paying a cost for being a Kashmiri, for being a Muslim, for having an independent opinion, for the crime of having the ability to think and read letters. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we know, the story of the Valley of Kashmir for the past 75 years is not just the whole story, because the state of Jammu and Kashmir has several other component parts. But it's mainly, we talk about the Valley of Kashmir because it's in the Valley of Kashmir where there is disaffection, and there has been an uprising, and there has been gross human rights violations. I have today with me on the panel 4 very distinguished speakers, and I'm just going to welcome 3 distinguished speakers on the panel, and 2 are going to join us virtually. I'm going to start by asking Christine Chung, the Human Rights Officer at the OHCHR, based in Geneva, to tell us, really to put in context when we talk about human rights abuses. Most exceptionally, 2 UN reports were prepared on human rights in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And Christine, the first thing I want to ask you is, what do you think the significance of these reports are, and what did they contribute to the general discourse when we talk about human rights abuses in Kashmir?
Thank you, Victoria. First of all, thank you for the introduction. And thank you to all of you for choosing this panel. I find this is my 3rd time at the conference, that it's always a challenge to choose a panel because each one is so incredibly important. The subjects and the speakers and the discussion. So thank you for making time for this subject. And I'd also like to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me to join this really illustrious panel and so many really, really interesting human rights defenders and friends in Lahore. To get to the answer to your question, Victoria, in 2018, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights released a report, and it was the first report on the human rights situation in Kashmir by the United Nations. This report was followed 1 year later by the second report, and these were both reports that covered the situation, the human rights situation, not only on the Indian side of the line of control, but also the Pakistan side of the line of control. I'm not sure how many of you in the room have read either of the reports, and if you want, I can go into some of the key findings just to familiarize you with the nature of the violations and the level of detail in which these were covered. But what I want to emphasize is that these reports, despite the fact that they came out before August 2019 and the profound changes that have taken place in one part of Kashmir, the findings are not outdated. And that's because there has been impunity continuing for these violations. And they continue. The situation, I think, in fact, has deteriorated. The other issue is that there were a set of recommendations made in these reports. There were recommendations addressed to the international community. There were recommendations addressed to the government of India, and there were recommendations addressed to the government of Pakistan. Now, for the most part, these recommendations have not been implemented. Although I caveat that with the news this week, actually in the last days, that Pakistan has passed an anti-torture bill, and I believe that's waiting for a signature from the president. And Pakistan has also criminalized enforced disappearance, at least I believe the National Assembly has, and that is waiting, I guess, a Senate or a joint sitting to proceed to becoming a law. These were both actually recommendations that were made in this report, so that is a very recent development. These reports were important because it was an acknowledgement of the grave situation in Kashmir. I can go into some of the key findings if that would be of interest to those of you in the room. But I also, before I get into the two reports, wanted to emphasize that not only are the reports not outdated, but the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has continued to support monitoring and reporting on the situation, again, on both sides of the line of control. And the reporting has not ended with these two sort of comprehensive reports. They've also continued in statements and from the High Commissioner, but also the UN Human Rights Council has human rights has established the special procedures. And so through the special procedures, and that would be the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, the Special Rapporteur on Torture, Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, Working Group on Discrimination Against Women, I think there's 50 plus mandates. They also do this work. So they also monitor the human rights situation around the world, and they have issued quite some substantial communications to the government of India, also to Pakistan on issues on its side. But those communications continue the documentation process on the human rights violations. So I know we have limited time. If you want me to go into some of the key findings or recommendations, I'm happy to do so, but I can leave it for later.
I think that you've set the scene, and I think we'll come back to them.
Okay.
I think what is also particularly relevant is that you have the reports talk across the board about the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and I think if we're looking forward to the future, we only will get a resolution if we do look at the whole state of Jammu and Kashmir, and this is one of the difficulties, rather than just talking about the valley. But I'm going to turn now to Muzzammil Ayyub Thakkar, President of the World Kashmir Freedom Movement. Muzzammil, we've known each other for a long time in terms of my research on Kashmir, but what I want you to tell the audience is your story. You're an individual Kashmiri, but you also represent the Valley of Kashmir.
Thank you very much to Victoria, but also to the Asma Jahangir conference. It's a privilege to be here, and it's even more of a privilege that the conference organizers and Victoria have recognized the importance of having the indigenous people speak about themselves. And most importantly is that I'm here to make friends. I'm here to make friends so that when tomorrow somebody asks you about Kashmir or you want to talk about Kashmir, you can refer back to a primary source. You can say that your friend told you this and that he is the source of that information. Victoria's asked me to speak a little bit about myself. I would say that I am not as relevant as anybody else inside Kashmir. I have a story. It's not a very interesting story, but it gives you a brief understanding of what people of Kashmir have to go through. I was born in exile. My father was thrown out of Kashmir before I was born. I was born in exile, and recently I've been charged under the UAPA. I have also had 6 FIRs against me while I live in London. The Indian government have launched several cases against me while I live in London. The reason I mention this is to make people understand that even those of us that live outside of Kashmir, those of us that live in exile, we still face consequences. And you can only imagine what is happening inside Indian-occupied Kashmir. So again, understand that even for people like myself that live in privilege and recognize that privilege, even we suffer. Not on the scale of what people inside Kashmir do, but you can only imagine what is happening inside Kashmir. Now, whatever has happened in Kashmir is not new. This didn't happen after 2019 when abrogation of Article 31735A happened. It didn't happen after 2016 when Burhan Wani was martyred. It didn't happen in 2008 when the Amaranth land row happened. It's been happening since pre-partition, the issues of Kashmir. But the violence and the occupation has, of course, been happening since 1947. I would call it an open-air prison, literally an open-air prison, to the extent that even India's own opposition, Rahul Gandhi, was not permitted to travel into Kashmir. And a couple of days ago, one of the Sikh leaders, I can't remember his name, he was also prevented from traveling into Kashmir. I haven't even spoken about the Kashmiris yet. Now, what is exactly happening inside Kashmir? I was having a chat with my wife, and we were trying to come up with a few things that what is the actual reality? If we had to make a list very quickly: occupation, subjugation, oppression, hundreds of thousands dead, extrajudicial killings, destruction of property, business, and infrastructure in the billions, tens of thousands raped and gang raped, innumerable enforced disappearances, thousands of mass and unmarked graves, human shields, torture camps, bullets, pellets, orphans, widows, half-widows, cyber cells, media blackouts, illegal draconian laws, false flag operations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, genocide, demographic change, settler colonialism, fake and staged encounters. The list is endless, and that's just off the top of our heads in the last 10 minutes. Everything that you can imagine inside Kashmir that is happening, and everything that is unimaginable happens inside Kashmir. This is for a fact. I lived in Kashmir between 2011 and 2016, on and off, but I was mostly in Kashmir. And the honest truth is that every family has a story. Every single family has a story. And some of those stories I will convey to you, maybe not immediately now, but it's important to understand that when we talk about the war, when we talk about the conflict, when we talk about human rights, we say human rights violations. I say to you, it is a human rights apocalypse happening inside Kashmir. One that has not been seen, at least, in most of our lifetimes. People refer back to the Holocaust. People refer back to Srebrenica. People refer back to Rwanda, and they said never again. I'm here to tell you that it has happened, it is happening, and will continue to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Muzzammil, and we'll come back to some of the points. I'm now going to ask one of our virtual speakers to talk to us. Tapan Bose, are you there? Tapan Bose, I think you may have heard him earlier today in another session. He's described as an Indian activist, actor, director, South Asia Forum for Human Rights. Tapan? It'd be nice to welcome you. I think also, as we're looking at the Kashmir issue, what we are looking at is the greater spread that because of what's happened in Kashmir, and this is something that is relatively new, particularly since the advent of the Modi government, and fits to the title of our session, which is Kashmir and Religious Intolerance in India and the State of Minorities in Kashmir. So we mustn't forget also that there are Pandits in Kashmir, and what has the spread of the intolerance of Kashmir in general has led to this huge intolerance of Muslims in Greater India. I'm going to ask you, sitting in India, what are Indians expecting from this changed environment, particularly since 2019? Muzzammil has pointed out that the situation in the Valley of Kashmir was bad even before then, as indeed it was, but we now have a new political map of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which has marked Ladakh as a union territory, including Gilgit-Baltistan, and Jammu and Kashmir as another union territory, which includes Azad Jammu and Kashmir. So I think it would be really interesting to know, do Indians feel this is a fait accompli? Is this it? Is this the end of the Kashmir issue from the Indian perspective?
BJP thinks it has arrived at the final solution of Kashmir. And by abrogating Article 370, breaking up the territory into two union territories, it thinks it has been able to solve the problem, or whatever the problem they anticipate, in their opinion. They have changed the state domicile law. They have now created the way of bringing in Indians from other parts and giving them the permission or the right to purchase land, settle down in Kashmir, and eventually become voters. In fact, in the coming election, they were already trying to give voting rights to people who had come into Kashmir over the course of the last 2-3 years. However, there was massive protest both in Jammu and in the valley, and they have now withdrawn that notification. But I'm quite sure they're going to come back with it again. So what BJP has done is that they have removed, by removing Article 370, they have been able to extend all the Indian laws into this former state of Jammu and Kashmir, which was the basic function of Article 370. Article 370 was primarily to protect the institutions of Jammu and Kashmir and not to allow Indian laws into the state. However, over the years, Article 370 was diluted in many ways, and actually with the consent of because in Article 370, the provision was there that its status can be changed with the consent of the Legislative Assembly and the government of Jammu and Kashmir. And the government of Jammu and Kashmir, various governments, since 1947, had agreed to buy. So therefore, things like the Supreme Court of jurisdiction of the Supreme Court of India was extended. The Election Commission jurisdiction was extended. The Administrative Service of India was also extended. And in that manner, many provisions of the Indian Constitution and parliamentary acts were already introduced into Jammu and Kashmir. And to that extent, Article 370 remained very, very diluted. But the critical thing, that is the state subject law, which was enacted by the former ruler in the 1930s, that had remained. And the state subject law primarily protected the local people from against alienation of their land or purchase of the land by outsiders, those who are not state subjects, and also the jobs and the business, etc., the right of the Kashmiri people were protected. And this is something which is very, very critical and very important for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. By removing those, what BJP claims that it has integrated Jammu and Kashmir fully with India, because now Indians can go and settle down there, which earlier they could not.
And if I could just ask you a very quick supplementary question to that, what does it tell us about the Indian government's intentions by producing the official map, which does show Gilgit-Baltistan as part of Ladakh? There is no historical connection.
Well, I think, they don't really any longer talk about either Azad Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan anymore. There is no real reference to the part of Jammu and Kashmir, former Riyasat, which is under the control of Pakistan. In fact, de facto, I would say, and I've written this, the government of India has solved the problem of Kashmir by making the LOC as the de facto international border, because it now has no claims and does not actually proffer any real claims on those parts of the former Riyasat. So that is the way I see is their solution. And but the real reason for this is their vote bank in India. It has nothing to do with the people of Kashmir or the integration of Kashmir for the greater glory of BJP. What BJP, by doing this, has shown that they are here to resolve what for the 70 years the Congress government and others could not do. Just by one stroke, they have resolved it. Kashmir has now been fully integrated. Indians can go and settle down, buy land, etc., etc. So this is the basic thing that they have done, primarily to keeping the eye on the Hindu vote bank in India.
But what's interesting, I think, and we must take on board, is that they have done so unilaterally without consulting, as you pointed out, Tapan, without consulting the will of the people. And furthermore, going against the terms of the Shimla Agreement, where the clause suggested that the issue would be resolved bilaterally or by any other means mutually agreed upon. And as I think Muzzammil has mentioned and talked about, he is one Kashmiri. There are many Kashmiris. The Kashmiris of all people have been affected. I'm going to turn now to you, Saiyidain Hameed, Indian social and women's rights activist, because I really do think when we're talking about the Kashmir issue or the Jammu and Kashmir issue, it is not a piece of real estate. And certainly one of the problems is when we talk about it in shorthand, it's almost as though it can be tossed back and forward between India and Pakistan. But within the region are at least 12 million people, and each one of those people has a human right.
Thank you very much, Victoria, and my dear panelists and distinguished members of the audience. अपनी बात शुरू करने से पहले मैं याद करना चाहती हूँ इस कॉन्फ्रेंस की जो एक रूह है वो है आसमा जहांगीर, और मैं वो सफ़र याद करना चाहती हूँ वैली का, श्रीनगर का, सारे कश्मीर का जो हमने साथ किया था. It was a very poignant time, and Asma being Asma was all over the valley, and her spirit still hovers there. जब ये कॉन्फ्रेंस का इनॉग्रल हो रहा था, उस वक्त सुलेमा ने 3 बातें कही थीं. जो गुफ्तगू यहाँ होगी उसमें 3 एस्पेक्ट्स उन्होंने उसका जिक्र किया था. It's going to be a difficult conversation, it's going to be a controversial conversation, and it's going to be an uncensored conversation. I am a Kashmir born, and I always thought कि मैं कश्मीर में पैदा हुई हूँ, मगर मैं I cannot own property in Kashmir because my parents were not Kashmir born. And अभी आपसे तपन ने जो बात कही है, वो law को has been reversed in the sense that people like me can own property in Kashmir. But that really hurts me. That really hurts me because वो एक मुआहिदा था जो इस 1947 में जो मुआहिदा हुआ था उसके खिलाफ है ये. I am not a Kashmiri subject. I shouldn't own any property in Kashmir, and I am very happy with that. जब ये सारा रिवर्सल हुआ और उसके बाद एब्रोगेशन हुआ 370 or 35A का, and then I was talking to my dear colleague who I have not met and will always hold close to me. We talked about my own experience, and I'm a very एक हमारे एक एक्सप्रेशन है, एक जन्म भूमि होती है, एक कर्म भूमि होती है. मेरी जन्म भूमि भी कश्मीर है, मेरी कर्म भूमि भी कश्मीर. 2019 में हम एक छोटा सा डेलीगेशन लेके हम कश्मीर गए, and it was called Women's Voice Fact-Finding Report on Kashmir. One of my members of my delegation was the granddaughter of a very well-known person in Pakistan who had come to Pakistan, a man by the name of Sajjad Zahir, Banne Bhai. I think some people may remember him, but lot of people wouldn't even remember. And I think this is also a time to remember some of these people, because it's all in the spirit that, that Asma, in a sense, it sunk into us, her spirit. So I'm very briefly going to talk to you about कि औरतों का वहाँ क्या उस वक्त जब ये एब्रोगेशन हुआ और हालात ऐसे हो गए कि जिसको मैं यहाँ लिख के लाई हूँ कि एक कश्मीरी पंडित ने क्या कहा उसके बारे में. एक कश्मीरी पंडित ने उसके बारे में ये कहा कि abrogation, now I am quoting a Kashmiri Pandit, a man by the name of Sanjay Tikku. उन्होंने कहा abrogation of 370 has made Kashmir more dangerous than 1990. Quote unquote. and he is the president of Kashmiri Pandit Sangharsh Committee. उन हालात में abrogation के बाद it is the women who came forward. We started our report by quoting a small verse of a poet called Comrade Abdul Sattar Ranjur, जो खुद मारे गए. He was killed in 1990. और मैं क्योंकि कश्मीरी बोलती नहीं, मगर उनके, I'm just going to translate few lines. Spring birds will flower, nightingales pain will, अब ये उम्मीद है उनकी. Sickness will leave the ailing, heart's longing of Ranjur will be fulfilled when the poorest will rule wearing the crown of glory. Abdul Sattar Ranjur in 1990, and this is 2022. At that time, जब हमने वहाँ कश्मीर का हमने कश्मीर के हालात देखे, तो हमने देखा कि सारी districts में we moved around all the districts, and we found that after 8 o'clock या 7 बजे के बाद भी घर से कौन निकलती थी? औरतें, क्योंकि मर्द निकलना would have been a really dangerous signal. उन्होंने हमसे औरतों ने कहा, we insist that men should go indoors after 6 p.m. Man or boy seen after dusk is a huge risk. If absolutely necessary, we women go outside. So women held up, and today as I'm talking now, I have my family, my friends, people who I hold very dear to me. I can't even talk to them. जब मैं दिल्ली में रहती हूँ, मेरे सारे जो I don't live in a foreign country. I'm going to, यहाँ से उठ के मैं दिल्ली जाऊँगी. I'll cross the border on foot, and I'm really grateful that this great moment, this conference gave me an opportunity to come and meet my dearest of friends here. I'm not able to meet 90% of my family because I only have a 5-day visa, just आना जाना मिला के सिर्फ 5 दिन है. जब इतनी जिंदगी में इतने लोग जो हैं, you cannot meet them, but I'm very grateful to be able to connect with them. And when I talk about the woman, I think of one woman जिसका नाम है परवीना आहंगर. Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons. For the last 23 years, this one woman, Parveena Ahangar, every month on a certain day, I think it's the 10th day of every month, वो अपने साथ at least 150-200 लोगों को लेके, and she sits in a public park in Kashmir with hundreds of pictures of disappeared young men from the age 14 on to 30, 35, किसी का बेटा, किसी का शौहर, किसी का रिश्तेदार. All these are either tell us if they are dead or they are alive. This one woman has made, I think, a great impact on the whole entire international community. Or I'm just going to quote the chief of UN, Antonio Guterres, जो अभी हमारे दिल्ली में आए थे, और उन्होंने just summarizing this because I'm right out of time. Yeah, 2 minutes. He made a statement which I think is very, very important. You have to delicately balance the whole diplomatic scenario. But what Mr. Antonio Guterres said was that India, as a historical leader of non-violent and anti-colonial struggle, he was obviously referring to Mahatma Gandhi, should promote and project rights of all, including minorities and Kashmiris. And then उन्होंने remind किया हमें, the government of my country reminded India that diversity is the richness that makes your country stronger. Now, this is it's a very simple statement, it's a very loaded statement. And I think these are the things which, you know, internationally there are vibrations. Sab jagah ek tarah se zameen hil rahi hai. And today, absolutely the last thing I want to talk about, I want to just mention to you is that, you know, the whole question of identity. A young man, एक खेत कुमार थे पिछले सेशन में, minorities के सेशन में, जिन्होंने ये कहा कि मैं पाकिस्तानी हूँ, मेरा नाम खेत कुमार है, मैं जहाँ भी जाता हूँ, लोग कहते हैं तुम तो इंडियन हो, अरे तुम यहाँ कैसे आ गए? वो कहते हैं नहीं, मैं तो पाकिस्तानी हूँ, मेरे. All of that, he's from, I think, Thar Parker or somewhere. When I was a member of the National Commission for Women, मैं एक मीटिंग अटेंड कर रही थी, और मेरा नाम आपके सामने है, and I was reported in the Indian newspaper as the chairperson of the National Commission for Women in Pakistan. So this whole thing, and now Kashmir and my fractured identity, I'm sorry Victoria, I've overdone my welcome on this panel, but I'm too full, my heart is too full. Thank you very much.
Not at all,
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think one of the problems with the Kashmir issue is that we all want to talk so much, and I've often had to apologize to people when they ask me one simple question, and I'm still going on answering it 20 minutes later. So thank you very much. I'm just going to, before we get to Aakar, Patel online, Christine, I want to ask you a supplementary question, because we do place a lot of pressure on the UN and a lot of emphasis on the UN, and we do think that the UN is the solution and can be the solution because of the UN resolutions which were passed in 48, 49. But in your reports, what was the most startling finding that you had?
I don't know if I can answer that question.
Oh.
I mean, the findings...
Well, I mean, I'll put it in a different way. Was there something which particularly surprised you, which you thought you knew, but then didn't realize you knew until you found it out this time around? I mean, were your findings the same as you'd expected, more or less?
Well, I mean, the findings, as I said earlier, you know, they're wide-ranging on both sides of the line of control, and so different kind of findings on the Pakistan side from the Indian side. And on the Indian side, obviously, there were findings of, you know, the problem with civilian killings, extrajudicial killings, legal framework problems where you have impunity built into the law, pellet gun, you know, shotguns firing pellets. We had all of that, and torture. The impunity, I think, I wouldn't say is startling, but I think that was one of the key takeaways, that despite all of the evidence of human rights violations, that there's utter impunity. And that's built into the laws where, you know, you have the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, you have detention laws that allow for sort of a revolving door of arbitrary detention. In terms of startling, perhaps, I mean, maybe this is getting a bit towards answering your question. I don't know how many of you are aware of the mass graves that have been uncovered in the Kashmir Valley. And there have been reports done by credible civil society organizations about these mass graves. And what's interesting is that there were, let me put it this way, there were state institutions. The State Human Rights Commission called for investigation. And the High Court in Srinagar also, you know, took human rights cases. And the fact that there were functioning state institutions that acknowledged human rights violations, and in some cases even awarded families some remedy, unfortunately that were not actually, I think, followed up with action by the state. I think that is interesting, that there were mechanisms available for people. I mean, obviously, as I said, the rulings were not followed through, because the State Human Rights Commission called for investigation of the mass graves that were not done. And in fact, that was the most recent letter from the special procedures to the government of India was about the failure to investigate the mass graves. So yeah, I mean, a lot of things were startling in the report or in the process of documenting and reporting.
I should say that both reports are available online, and sometimes it's good just to read so one gets the, rather than a protracted version, the original version, and you can read both those reports, which they do bear interesting reading, and they bear out your point in terms of the disappearances, and Muzzammil also mentioned the disappearances and mass graves, because that, I think the story of Parvina Iyengar, who is well known for having set up this organization, I think her son was 20 when he disappeared, and that was about 25 years ago, and she's still wondering what happened to him. And I don't think any of us can really appreciate the agony of not knowing what's happened to your son. Now, we do have online, again, I hope, Aakar Patel. Thank you very much, Aakar. Welcome to Lahore virtually. And what I'd like to ask you is, what challenges do you find as a journalist and an activist in bringing the story to the fore? We've talked to you, I read out the journalist in Kashmir who found it impossible to do anything, but is there any window of opportunity where you feel that you can report the truth and that you actually can act with integrity, or are you always feeling you're under pressure to write what you believe the Indian authorities want you to hear?
There is a window. I'm not sure where it is. I think the problem for most of us who are in the media in India is that we are talking to an audience that has taken leave of its senses. How do you convince a nation that believes it is constitutionally secular but has gone off the rails in the last few years entirely? I don't know the answer to that. I'll try and go through some of the problems we face, and perhaps the answer might emerge from the audience. So for the first time in India, since 1947, we don't have a minister in our cabinet who is Muslim. So we have 200 million Muslims in this country, 20 crore people, not one Muslim minister. We have a ruling party with a full majority in the Lok Sabha, the lower house, what would be the National Assembly in Pakistan. 303 MPs, none of whom is a Muslim. In the last Lok Sabha, we had 282 MPs in the BJP. Once again, a full majority, none of whom was a Muslim. In 15 states in India, we don't have a Muslim minister in the cabinet. In 10 states in India, we have one Muslim minister normally given the minority affairs portfolio, which is like the scrap that is thrown to the Muslims to say that you are included, but you're not really. So this is political exclusion of the sort that we have without any theory. There is no theoretical basis for why we are excluding Muslims. We're just choosing to do so without having any reason to do this, and behind the carapace, behind the sort of Nehruvian secular carapace of being this inclusive nation. Interfaith marriage has been banned since 2018. 7 states in India, including the state I live in now, Karnataka, have banned marriages between Muslims and Hindus. And for a Hindu to marry a Muslim, they have to apply to the state 30 days in advance. The state will approve whether or not the marriage will take place. Marriages can be undone by the state, including those with children, if the state believes that there is coercion. An adult woman's testimony is insufficient evidence for the government of India and the states in India to accept the fact that the woman converted of free volition. It is the man she married and the family she's marrying into to prove to the district magistrate or to the collector that the conversion was not coerced in a part of the world where culture is very heavy. So we have people who marry into families will adopt that family's culture, by which I mean faith. And so in that part of the world, we are sort of essentially banning interfaith marriage. Muslims are the only community in India for whom divorce is criminalized. So in 2017, the Supreme Court of India invalidated triple talaq in one sitting. After that, there was no reason for the government to do so, but the BJP in 2019 criminalized the offering of triple talaq in one sitting. And what that means is, if I were to tell my wife talaq, talaq, talaq in one sitting, we would not be divorced and it would not be a crime. If a Muslim man were to be accused of saying that to his wife, they would not be divorced, but it would be a crime. So we have criminalized the utterance of words because we dislike Muslims so much. Beef lynching, as a journalist, I should say that beef lynching as a category of violence did not exist in India, to my knowledge at least, and I've been around for a bit. Till 2015, when the BJP criminalized the possession of beef. And what happened is 2 states run by the BJP, Maharashtra first, Haryana next, said that anybody accused of possessing beef, and we reverse the burden of proof here. So unlike the common law statute, the basis of jurisprudence in South Asia says that you are innocent until you are proven guilty. What the beef law says is, if you are accused of having beef in your fridge or your van, it is for you to prove that that meat is not beef. And a man was convicted in Gujarat, my state, in 2019 of serving beef at his daughter's wedding. The police could not prove that this meat that was served was beef. The court sentenced him to 10 years, saying that if the state can't prove it, it's for you to prove. Since you can't prove it, you go to jail. The High Court reversed this order without any legal or jurisprudential basis, but purely on embarrassment. That is where we are. We are passing laws that we can't enforce because we're too ashamed to be able to use them.
I mean, just to talk about this, Aakar, it's putting the discrimination in the wider context against Muslims throughout India, that it's becoming impossible for them. And I think the other aspect I would say, as someone coming from the United Kingdom, is that this is becoming the true face of India, whereas many people in the West still think the true face of India is indeed this Nehruvian secularism. They haven't quite woken up yet to the fact of what's going on.
I don't know if that's necessarily true. So in late 2019, we passed a law on citizenship that discriminates exclusively against Indian Muslims. What we said is, those non-Muslims who migrated to India from either Afghanistan, Bangladesh or Pakistan before the 31st of December 2014 would be given asylum. Those Muslims who came here in the same period would not be given it. In parallel, there was a law called the National Register of Citizens, where we said that anybody who could not prove that they were not citizens of this country would be sent to jail, as is happening in one state in India, in Assam. What happened there is that India's Muslims, led by Muslim women, they mounted a protest so brave and so effective that the state had to pull back. And the most important reason why that law, which was passed in late 2019, is still not implemented on the ground is that protest by Muslims, especially Muslim women. But another reason is that the European Parliament tabled a motion extremely condemnatory, rightly so, of India, saying you can't do this. India sent its foreign minister to Brussels, and we don't know what happened there because India is no longer a full democracy and we are not particularly transparent. But I suspect that what happened is that Mr. Jaishankar said when he went to Brussels that, okay, the law's been passed, we will not implement it. Almost 3 years since the passing of the Citizenship Amendment Law, the Act, the law has not been enforced on the ground, and there is no sign of the National Register of Citizens. So to my mind, I think the external world does have a say in what happens in India. People from the OHCHR should know this, that I think that India, being constitutionally secular and open notionally at least, is vulnerable to what the outside world says. We want to be a part of the civilized world. We want a chair on the Security Council. And we are vulnerable to what our friends in the West say. And I think our friends in the West should tell us that what we are doing to Muslims in India, what we are doing to Muslims in Kashmir is wrong, and we should stop. And I think that fora like this help. And I think that I'm very grateful to the Asma Jahangir Foundation and to you for having done this. It gives us a chance to speak. The number of places one can speak about these things in India is quite limited at the moment.
Well, thank
that
you.
India,
Sorry, last point, yes. Thank you, Aakar. Do you have a last point? I mean, we are running slightly out of time, unfortunately.
I do not, and I'm quite happy to be called on this, and I'm quite happy to speak to my Pakistani sisters and brothers.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, I think we're going to just have a few minutes for questions because we did start late. So if I've got a question, and I'd like within this for us all to be thinking out for the final sort of comment is where really do we go from here? What can we possibly move forward on? We do have to make a resolution, and I think what we would feel is essential that India and Pakistan have to get back to the negotiating table. There has to be some dialogue. As we heard earlier on the Afghan session with Mehbooda, guns and bullets just don't solve anything. So do we have any questions? Yes, this gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kaisar Bengali. It's encouraging what Aakar Patel said about the European Parliament.
Yes.
But with the changing strategic alignments, placing US alongside India, can we expect the international community to speak about what is happening in Kashmir, mass graves, etc., in the same language that is being spoken about Ukraine?
I think that's a very good question. We did have an encouraging statement coming from the government of Germany following the foreign minister's visit there. Who would like to answer that question? Muzzammil.
You want to take a few questions? Or
Well, perhaps I'll take a couple more questions and then we can have a general wrap-up. If we have another question. Do we have any more questions right now? That gentleman there and then this one. All right, this one here. Yes, thank you.
I just personally think like international mediation is really important to resolve the issue. I would just like to ask Christine, like, what role can the UN play? I know it's a recommendation body, but what role can they play primarily as a mediator to bring both the parties on the talking table at least, and then we can see from there?
Right, do we hear that question? What role can the UN bring as a mediator to bring the parties together? I think we do recognize that there has to be some bringing together. They're not necessarily going to do it spontaneously. Christine, perhaps you might like to answer that. I think we probably, and this gentleman here, will get your question first.
My question is kind of similar to that question, and also being that, why the West problem are our problems and our problems are not West problems? Because India being a bigger economy is actually more effective and UN is being toothless. Is it true that UN is more bark than bite because it's been ineffective in resolving that issue? And along with that, I would like to mention that Gilgit-Baltistan is suffering because of it, and it's been 75 years since it has been attached to it. So what can UN now do to reduce the suffering of the people? Thank you.
Well, there's two questions I think that Christine's going to have to answer.
Okay.
And then maybe Muzzammil, you can do a wrap-up, and Sayyida, just a couple of sentences each.
Let me just say those maybe were not unanticipated questions because every time I'm in Pakistan, I get similar questions about why the United Nations is not doing this or why the United Nations is not doing that. But what I usually respond is the United Nations is 193 member states. So when the United Nations doesn't take action on a country situation or an issue, that's 193 states that are not working together to address these issues. That includes Pakistan, that includes the other 192 member states. So how effective or ineffective, I think we just need to remember what we're talking about when we're talking about the United Nations. In terms of solutions, I do want to remind you that the Secretary General has offered his good offices to help India and Pakistan, and I think that offer still stands. And in terms of, I think there was a question about sort of unequal attention geopolitically, where states are willing to look at the Ukraine situation, but perhaps are not willing to look at the situation in Kashmir or in other places that are not on the radar at the moment. And I just want to draw your attention to what happened in Geneva a few weeks ago. And in Geneva, we had the meeting of the Human Rights Council. Now, the Human Rights Council is a subset of the General Assembly. It's 47 UN member states that meet, and it's a sort of, the body, you know, has a revolving membership. Pakistan is currently a member, but is coming to the end of its term. 47 member states meeting in Geneva to discuss human rights concerns around the world, including China. So the High Commissioner's Office, you may have read, produced a report on the situation of Xinjiang and a Muslim minority in China. And that report was produced also under the mandate of the High Commissioner, given to the High Commissioner by the General Assembly of the United Nations. And that report does not appear on the agenda. It was because it was not passed by resolution for the High Commissioner to present a report. But the High Commissioner produced a report under her mandate. And the Human Rights Council put forward, there was a resolution that was debated and voted on about whether there should be on the agenda for the next session of the Human Rights Council a debate and discussion on that report. And unfortunately, the members voted 19 against, 17 in favor, with the rest abstaining. So there was an opportunity, I think, to take up a human rights situation of minorities, and the Human Rights Council, the UN member states and the Human Rights Council chose not to adopt that resolution. So I think I appreciate your frustration, but I think we need to look at how some of these frustrating situations arise. Thank you.
Very much, Christine. In fact, I've had a message that our time has ended. I'm so sorry because we've sort of barely scratched the surface of the issue, and there's humanitarian things.
Can I say one sentence?
Well, I've been told time has ended. We have to vacate the hall.
Only with respect
one word.
Yeah.
One sentence.
What you had said that what is the road ahead? You had said that.
Well, that's what I wanted to try and address, what the road ahead is.
I just want to say that I have attended about 5 sessions, not all, through the last 2 days. And it's remarkable what level of similarities we have. Our problems, everything just converges. So I think that what our friend from Afghanistan said, that ये गुफ्तगू बंद ना हो, बात से बात चले. सरदार जाफरी ने कहा था कि गुफ्तगू बंद ना हो, बात से बात चले. So I think this conversation is extremely important.
It is.
That's all I want to say. Because I respect you, that's why I wanted to add this.
Thank you so much, Saida. No, I think dialogue is the only way, and discussion and an open mind. And so I'd like to thank my 5 panelists, Tapan and Aakar, online virtually, Christine, Saida, and Muzzammil. I'm sorry we haven't had more time. It's just really not enough time to discuss the Kashmir issue in 1 hour. And thank you all, audience, for participating and attending when there are other interesting sessions to attend as well. Thank you.